passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria.
Welcome to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you're a transitioning veteran, an entrepreneur wannabe, or someone who's still stuck in that job trying to escape, this podcast is dedicated to your success. So welcome aboard, sit back, and enjoy the ride. Today we're talking about franchising. Franchising might be a good way for you to go if you're looking to run your own business, but maybe you don't have your own business idea, or maybe you don't want to actually resurrect a business from scratch. Franchising allows you to actually run your own business and have somewhat of a corporate structure and guidance and other things in place on the day you start. Franchises have a tendency to be more successful than a business that typically gets started from scratch. So we're talking with a franchise attorney today who knows a lot about franchising. And if you're out there thinking about starting your own business and not sure what to do, then you might want to consider franchising. So I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Josh Brown with Indie Franchise Law, and he also has a podcast called Franchise Euphoria. John's an attorney that assists entrepreneurs in getting their business turned into a franchise. And talking with you before, you also, in the process of doing that and learning all about that, you've also gotten to know the franchise industry quite well. And I believe once in a while you actually help people that are looking to buy a franchise or invest in a franchise, help with the legal aspects on that end too, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I actually do both. It's funny, when I first started practicing in the area of franchise law, I really only worked with people who were looking to buy franchises, the franchisees, the owner-operators. And the reason I got into it from that perspective was, quite frankly, those are the people who need it the most. I mean, the franchisors are typically well represented and they have counsel, but it's always the people who are looking to go buy the franchise and become the franchisees that, for whatever reason, don't get legal counsel, or they go to their cousin's brother-in-laws, to just have them review the documents real quick. And the reality is, in franchising, it is so important that you get professional assistance, because a primary difference between a franchise business and just a business you start yourself is that if you start a business yourself and you decide you no longer want to be a part of it, you just close the doors. That's it, and you move on. But when you're in a franchise system, the average franchise agreement is 10 years. Some are 15, some are 20, and there's a certain amount that are 5 years. But in any of those scenarios, you're locked in for a certain period of time, and you're going to part ways with money up front. So you better make sure that it's something worthwhile before you jump right in.
Yeah, I've been to franchise shows, and I know people that have owned franchise. I actually considered it in the past myself, but I never realized, I guess a lot of people, they're spending so much money investing in the franchise. The last thing I want to do is spend a bunch more money on legal representation. But when you think about it, I guess when you're spending that kind of money, you better have some kind of legal representation, make sure you're doing the right thing.
Can I just be blunt in my answer to that? I think you as a veteran and all your veteran listens will appreciate this. That is just a bunch of crap, and this is why. It's
true though. It's so true.
It's so true, but it's so stupid. It is, and the thing is, it's so stupid because these documents are so one-sided in favor of the franchisor, and most of them have promissory notes associated with them or not promissory notes, but guarantees. Some do have promissory notes if you're borrowing money or utilizing the franchisor's finances, but all of them have personal guarantees. So where you sign up as a franchisee and you open up a business and you buy the business with an established, let's say, LLC or something, and you think that you're protected or you're limiting your own liability. Well, you're not, because all of them have personal guarantees associated with them, and a lot of times it's a husband and wife type of situation. So you're personally on the hook for that business. And the average franchise, the average, and trust me, it runs the gamut. I mean, you can get into franchising for as little as a few $1,000s, and it can go all the way up to multiple millions. But roughly, if you're looking at the average franchise, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple $100,000. And if you go to an attorney in terms of reviewing the legal documents that knows what they're doing, it's really not going to cost you that much money. I mean, I know for myself, and look, this is not obviously a plug for me because I don't care who you go to. I just think you should go and get good, objective advice from somebody. But it really shouldn't cost more than, a couple $1,000s to do that. And when you factor that in to the overall cost of a franchise at $200,000, that's why I say it's so stupid not to do that.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, I acknowledge that it is ridiculous that people think like that, but I myself have thought like that with a few things in the past, and that's why I can relate to it. You're like, oh man, we're spending all this money, but when you think about it, that's really the time you should be having legal representation because you're going in all in with that much money. But
well, you know what it is, Joe? You know what it is? Not to cut you off, but what it is that people have this feeling, and I get this. People say, look, the agreement is what it is. We're probably not going to be able to change much. So what's the point in hiring an attorney, right? I mean, that's where I think people's minds initially go.
Well, actually, I was going to ask you that question because if I show up with an attorney to buy my franchise, is the franchise company really going to change their documents and change the agreement based on my attorney saying that you got to change some things in order for me to buy this franchise?
Well, the answer is it really depends on the franchise. I mean, are you going to have luck changing the franchise agreement with McDonald's? No.
Yeah.
But that's only part of the equation. See, that's the thing people don't think about is everybody thinks that you go to an attorney so that you can get a legal document changed or drafted, or, in the case of a franchise, you looking to make things change. The biggest part of it is understanding what you're getting into and fully understanding what the agreement says and what it doesn't say. And there's keys within franchise agreements, especially around, there's some really important things you need to pay attention to. For instance, territorial language. How does the franchise define a territory, and what is the meaning that it's putting around that definition? And just being able to help a potential franchisee understand that is really, really important for them having a full appreciation of what they're getting into. And any good, reputable franchise will tell you, go find a good attorney, or here's a recommended franchise attorney, because they want you to have fully vetted the process, and they want you to look over the document and be fully educated on what you're getting into.
Now, having been in this business for a while and seen both sides of the coin in the franchise industry, since this is a podcast that's centered around helping veterans transition to the world of entrepreneurship, the reason I wanted to have you on here is a lot of veterans do choose franchising as a way to own their own business. And it's sort of a good middle ground if somebody really doesn't know what they want to go do, but they know they want to kind of run their own show, but yet they want to have a little bit of structure and some predetermined stuff and a reputable company behind them. So it can be a good way to go, but you obviously have to be careful, and you obviously have to choose the right franchise. So I don't necessarily want you to dime out some franchises here, but what franchises out there are that you have seen are some of the best ones for veterans to get into?
Well, the truth is, you're right. In a lot of situations, veterans do make great franchise owners. But the question to start with is never what's the right franchise for the veteran. The question is what's the right veteran for the franchise. In other words, every single person, whether you're a veteran or your typical civilian who's looking to find a business where you don't have to start from scratch, where you don't have to create the wheel, where you're taking advantage of somebody else's lessons and hard knocks, and you're essentially buying a brand and you're buying a system and you're buying a process that in theory works and has been proven to work in other geographic locations. I mean, that's what franchising is all about. But the fundamental question before you ever think about what franchise is going to be best for a veteran is you have to figure out based on the veteran's experiences, based on what they like, what are their life experiences, work experiences, military experiences, background, what is their personality like, right? I mean, we know that with any small business, and franchises are no exception, that, for instance, if you're the type of person, and this is a real basic example, but if you're the type of person that can't stand retail or can't stand going shopping or being around people throughout the course of a day, then you would never want to buy a retail franchise. And that sounds so obvious and commonsensical, but there are thousands of people on a daily basis that do just that. Because what happens is they get sucked into the idea of being the business owner, and they don't take the time to really dive into the underlying business model for the franchise, and they don't take the time to figure out what's going to be best for them at that point in their lives. I think fundamentally franchises, and quite frankly, there's a lot of franchises that offer great discounts for veterans to get in, which on the one hand can be great, but on the other hand can lead to more disaster if they get into the wrong franchise. And so the question then is, what's the wrong franchise? Well, you have to, whenever you get into any business, as a franchisee, the chances are you're probably not going to have prior business ownership experience. You may or may not, but a lot of people do not. But you do have to have the ability to manage people, to operate a system, and to believe in a system that you're operating. And I think fundamentally, any person who's looking to purchase any kind of business needs to ask themselves, can I see myself working in this business 100 hours a week? Can I see myself dedicated to this? Do I have a passion for this? And I know a lot of people talk about passion as the overriding concern. And I'm not that person. I mean, I believe passion has its purpose. I think with a franchise, though, because you already have the economic model in place, you've got, and you can establish the work competency. In other words, for any good franchise, it should be simple enough that you can go in and have a clear understanding of what they do. And so therefore passion becomes all that much more important, because you're going to be married to this business, even though it's a franchise. And I think that's a fundamental mistake that a lot of people make, is they think that they're just buying a business in their box, that they're going to pay the money, open up the door, put up the sign, and all of a sudden business is going to flock in. And it just doesn't work that way.
And I would imagine that being a lot of veterans out there, the other thing that needs to be considered when you're talking about what franchise is best for you is geographically, because some franchises are just starting out, or some franchises are already locked out in certain geographic regions. So you're going to have to decide where is it you really prefer to live, if you do have a preference, which is another thing that would weigh in on what kind of franchise to go with.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, geographic location is huge, not only for where you want to live, but for the viability of the business. You want to make sure that from a proximity perspective, there's not too many of the same locations opened up nearby. You want to obviously make sure that there's enough of a space going out into the future. I think you also a big area of concern, especially for some of the newer franchises, or the ones that are just getting going, because after all, even McDonald's had to start from square one years and years ago,
Sure.
right? So that everybody has to start from square one, but it's real important to vet the system. It's really important before you buy a franchise to use common sense and also dive in deep into what the corporate structure is like. I mean, if the person who started the franchise, let's say a person who started a franchise and his name is Mike. If Mike is the CEO, the chief development officer, the COO, the CFO, the head of marketing, the sales, right? That's going to raise a red flag. But I've seen that. I've actually helped people in systems where they are about to buy a system, and I say, what's the corporate structure like? And so we walk through, and some of this information is contained within the franchise disclosure document, and it's required. And we dive into, okay, what happens if you have a problem? Who do you contact? Well, I contact Mike. Okay, well, what happens if you have a problem with something with the computer systems? Who's your point of contact at the company? Well, that's Mike. And you start going down this, and you start realizing, well, what kind of structure are you really buying into?
It's a single point of failure.
Exactly. And so that not every franchise is going to be built out, obviously, like McDonald's, Subway, and the ones that have been around forever and are the largest. But you also need to understand that part of what you're paying for as a franchisee, part of that upfront franchise fee is going towards the entire system. And there's going to be problems in any system, and you're going to have questions. I mean, whether you buy a franchise or whether you start your own business, the first 6 to 9 months, there's going to be a lot of things that happen. You want to be darn sure that not only do you have a good point of contact, but that point of contact is not going to be overwhelmed. I've seen systems that are 75 to 80 stores deep. They have that many franchisees, and you still have the original founder and creator who's answering phone calls and doing all these other things, running around in 50 different directions. Well, that's ultimately a recipe for disaster.
All right. So you've obviously learned the ins and outs of the franchise business by representing people that are buying franchises, but you're not really in the business of helping people to find the franchise that's right for them, correct?
Yeah, it's, I'm not a franchise consultant. I think what ends up happening is, depending on when people come to me, in the process, like a lot of times, Joe, people will come to me early on where they're just trying to say, hey, I know I want to do something. Maybe they were laid off. Maybe they were put into a forced retirement, or maybe they're just tired of a corporate job, or, in your case, people are coming back from serving our country, and they're saying to themselves, I want to get into something, I want to feed that fire. And I help people decide whether or not, hey, do you want to go in the franchise route, or do you want to go the entrepreneurial route? But when it comes to finding the exact system, I sort of partner up with consultants that I know and trust to help with that. And, I think that highlights an important point, because in franchising, there's 2 different kinds of consultants. And I always talk about this, and I think people need to know this. There are the franchise consultants that are independent, and then the non-independent. So I have a good friend who is an independent franchise consultant. And what that means is, when you go to him, he'll help you find the right franchise, but you're going to pay him along the way. But there's a whole host of other franchise consultants where you don't pay a dime. And so it's really, really attractive. And so you find a consultant who's part of a bigger organization. Well, you don't pay them a dime because basically they've got a big network of franchises that's associated with their company. And if they matched you up with one of those franchise systems, they get a big payday on the backside if you end up signing up and moving through. And I know a lot of great consultants who do that, but you got to understand the motivations behind it.
Yeah, there's a little bit of conflict of interest there, I would say.
Well, exactly. And that's why, I obviously as an attorney, or as professionals, it's an objective view of the franchise system. And when you go to independent franchise consultants, it's an objective view. When you go to your typical franchise consultant, it's just not objective. That doesn't mean it's bad. I don't want to lay that impression. I have some very good friends that are excellent franchise consultants, and they're not independent, and they do a good job of, if somebody comes in and one of the systems within their own network is not a good match, they'll steer them elsewhere and they won't benefit from it, but it's the right thing to do. But you just got to be careful, because when you're talking about a significant amount of money that can be that can be paid on the back
Yeah.
end to some of these consultants. It can be 20, 30, $40,000 and more. And so there's definitely the incentive there. But I think veterans really need to be careful in looking at the entire picture when they're coming back, because it's real easy to just say, oh yeah, you don't cost anything. Okay, sure. I'll just go to you. Well, make sure that you've checked that person out and checked their company out before you do that.
So where would be the best place to start for a veteran who's just now considering doing something and they're pretty sure they want to go into the franchise industry? How do they start looking? How do they identify the ones that are out there?
Well, I think, if they've already decided that they want to move into the franchise space, I think they can do a little self-assessment themselves to start. I think they can figure out, okay, do I want to get into a retail franchise? Do I want to get into a non-brick and mortar franchise? Do I want to get into, the senior care services? Do I want to get into the restaurant services? I mean, these are things that a lot of people can figure out themselves because they know themselves well enough. If you don't know yourself well enough, then I think the first place to start is to find a good franchise consultant that like, and trust, or an advisor or an attorney, or an accountant or somebody who like, and trust, or a business coach who can kind of help you through that process, because those are really kind of self-realization items. And I think once you identify, okay, I know I want to get into a restaurant retail franchise, then I think it's time to then go seek out either your attorney and then get a consultant involved, or seek the consultant and then get an attorney involved to move forward with that. But I think it's really, really important to figure that out first and then move to the consultant or the attorney. I think there's so many options out there. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize that, franchising runs across the entire U.S. economy. I mean, I think the last statistic I saw was somewhere in the neighborhood of, one in 20 employees work for some sort of franchise system. So it's not just that franchising runs through the restaurant space. That's just where they're most well known. Whenever anybody thinks of a franchise, they think of Subway, McDonald's, and so forth. But really, one of the hottest, and I say hottest in quotes, one of the hottest sectors is the senior sector, because obviously you have all these baby boomers that are approaching retirement. And so there's franchises popping up left and right in terms of senior care services, some of which are non-brick and mortar, where you're just providing home health care services, because a lot more people want to grow old gracefully in their own homes as opposed to going to a retirement home. But there's other franchise systems that are retirement home based systems. And so, that's an example of really trying to figure out, from a personality perspective and from an experience perspective, where you as an individual would be best suited.
So the thing I got to ask is, I'm sure you know of some success stories in franchising. They've got to be out there. I've just always heard some of the horror stories where you got to be careful about, you're not just buying yourself a job. The deck is stacked in the favor of the big company that owns the franchise. I'm assuming some success stories. So can you actually make pretty good money, or after that first 5-year period or whatever, where everything gets paid off, can you really be going to the bank with these things? Is that possible, or are you basically just scraping by and barely paying the bills with the money you're making?
No, you can be really successful if you get into the right system and you have the right opportunity. I mean, ideal. That's one of the things that I really try to help people do, is get into those right systems. Now, I think it depends, right? I mean, if you, as an example, to get into, let's say, a McDonald's, well, first of all, there are few and far between opportunities right now, but you have to have over $1 million liquid to even be considered for one of their franchises. Okay. So, but if you get into a McDonald's, typically, obviously, a McDonald's, assuming you're in a good location and so forth, I mean, you can do really well with just one McDonald's, right? There's other franchises where you can do well with just one location, but a lot of them, I find, you can do okay with one location, but where you really start to make a lot of money and do well is if you have multi-unit ownership. And there's a lot of franchise systems that are moving more and more to that model because they realize that in order to have the best system long term, they need to make it as profitable as they can for the franchisees while also making it profitable for themselves. I mean, there's always been this notion, Joe, and you know, I read about it all the time years ago when I was getting into the franchise space. And it always struck me as interesting that there's always this, you know, it's like franchisors and franchisees just butting heads, when in reality, it should really be like a partnership, because the better a franchisee does, the better a franchisor does.
Sure.
You know, if a franchisee makes more money, that just means there's going to be more royalties flowing upstream to the franchisor. But what I find typically is that in a lot of smaller franchise businesses, like maybe your typical retail type smaller franchise, or if you're in a non-brick and mortar type franchise, you either need to have multiple locations to do well, or you need to think of it as more of a part-time job. I mean, there are franchises that are known as semi-absentee franchises, where the franchisor will require that you have another job because it's not meant to be a full-time job. I mean, I think a good example of this would be like a Great Clips or a Supercuts. And so I know individuals who own several of those. You know, I know one person who owns, 10 to 15 does really well.
Huh.
And it's that's what they call the manage the manager type franchise, because essentially as the owner, your job is to find a really good manager for your location. And then as you buy more units, your job is to find a general manager to manage everything. And then essentially you're managing the manager. And once you can get that system down, you can do really well because you can take advantage of economies of scale. And obviously, if you're generating maybe a smaller net profit from just one location, if you have 5, 6, 7, or 8, and you combine all those together, you can do really well.
So are there any franchises that don't actually require much in the way of employees? And I'm not joking when I say that, because I would imagine most franchises are going to be, especially in the retail sector, the bulk of your work and frustration is dealing with the employees.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that's actually becoming more and more popular these days. The answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of tutoring franchises where you can open up, whether it's a math tutoring or some other kind of specific skill. There are certainly tutoring franchises that have a brick and mortar component, but there are others where you can do it out of your home, where you're basically just buying the system and the brand, and you don't need anybody else to do that for you, so long as you're comfortable doing the tutoring. I mean, there's a whole host of one of the most popular kids franchises right now is Bricks for Kids. And that doesn't take a tremendous number of employees for their operation, yet you can do well with them. There's a lot of, it really just depends on the sector that you're looking at. But the short answer to your question is absolutely. There are franchises out there that you can operate where you're not going to be required, like you would in a fast food or a quick service restaurant or something like that, to have a lot of employees that tend to turn over a lot.
Now, do you have any statistics where you can compare? I know there's probably isn't such a thing as a typical franchise, but in the franchise world, do people that go into franchising have a better success rate than people that try to go out on their own?
That is a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, because if you go online, you'll find statistics which would say that 90% of franchises don't fail or 80% of franchises are successful. And I think that statistic is very, very misleading. I think when you look at starting your own business for the first 5 years, when you look at starting your own business versus buying a franchise, the failure ratio is basically the same. And
Interesting.
it's not that once you get past the 5 year period, I think you have a statistically higher chance with franchising. But one of the things that's left out, and the International Franchise Association has made us think about this as well, is that one of the things that's left out in the statistic in terms of failures in franchising, where you'll see a number like 90% succeed, is that in a franchise system, if your business isn't going well, I mean, let's say, Joe, you buy some franchise, you buy a sign shop, right?
Uh-huh.
And after, you realize, whoa, my expenses are really high. Things just aren't generating like I thought that they would. And you want to get out of it. Well, short of you going bankrupt, you have the opportunity to sell to somebody else, or to have the corporate headquarters has the right to essentially buy back or take over your franchise. Well, when that happens, that's not counted in the statistics as a failure, because there was no bankruptcy that was associated.
Sure.
To me, that's a failure.
Yeah, because as far as the
Right?
individual is concerned, they tried franchising and it didn't work for
Exactly.
them.
They tried franchising. It didn't work. That's a failure. That's not counted in some of those statistics that you see that are so heavily skewed to franchise success. And but so, if you're going into it, I tell people, I say, yeah, you have the same chance as failing as you do, starting out on your own. But what you can take advantage of are the fact that you have somebody else's systems in there. So it's not going to be as much of a headache, because so much of your success, quite frankly, beyond the system, beyond the brand, a lot of it, especially in the retail space, in the food space, is location and how good you are at managing everything. Because really, your typical franchisee, the best kind of franchisee, is going to be just a really kick butt operator and manager of people, because that's really what you should be doing. You're not having to develop the business model. It's already been developed for you. Your marketing in a lot of systems, that's part of a fee that you're paying. So a lot of your marketing is done, but you need to be able and be sure to do local marketing. So you have to be creative and be able to handle that. But in most situations, when it really comes down to it, you have to be able to effectively manage the system. And it's so important. That's where territory becomes, and geography becomes so important in terms of your success, as well as how much of a runway do you have? I mean, I find far too often people are undercapitalized when they get into business in general, but also when they get into franchising. Is I think if they can come up with the right amount of money just to get the thing open, then they'll be okay. But really, you really need to have, 9 months of a reserve. I say 6 to 9 months of a reserve. And if you have more, that's all the better. So you either have to have that in reserve capital, or you have to have the ability to get that capital if you needed it.
Well, yeah. So franchising is, no laughing matter, or it's certainly not a guarantee. And you're certainly not more protected from failure. It's still pretty much back on the individual business owner's shoulders. But if you're one of those folks out there that just doesn't have that idea, or you're not comfortable with striking it out on your own, franchising can definitely be a way to go. And you do have some backup and some structure already in place that can help you along the way. So
yeah, if you're too entrepreneurial, I mean, if you are one of those people, like, let's take myself for an example. I would be a terrible franchisee, believe it or not. I would be terrible. I'm always questioning procedures. I'm always thinking I could do things
wait,
better.
aren't you an attorney?
Yeah. But I'm a very entrepreneurial attorney, and I really, I'm very much the kind of guy that if I look back over the history of my life and my experiences, I mean, anytime I've worked in a larger organization, even if I've done well, I've always gotten to a point where I've thought, oh man, I wish, we could do this better, we could do that better. And it would just eat away at me. And finally I realized, well, I'm too entrepreneurial myself to even fit within a franchise system. And to a certain extent, I think, people are born that way, but you can become that way too. And if you're one of those people that thinks that way, like Joe, it always cracks me up when somebody will call me and meet with me and I'll talk to them about a system and, they'll ask me questions. And already before they've even signed, they're already trying to change the system. And I go, whoa, 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 whoa. You got to be real careful here, because it's not that in a good franchise system, you won't be able to change things. That's not the case. It's just slow going. I mean, it's a corporate structure. They've got a model, and the good ones obviously will listen to what your concerns are because they want to make their systems better as well. But it's not going to happen overnight, and possibly not happen at all. So if you're one of those people that you're already questioning things before you even get in the game, boy, I would consider that long and hard before I'd pull the trigger. And to me, I'd say, I've told people, you should never buy a franchise. Go do it yourself.
Yeah, and those characteristics you just talked about are like textbook characteristics of your typical entrepreneur, somebody that has to go do things on their own and for the most part is certifiably unemployable.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just can't, it's just, if you have that makeup, you're just never going to be happy. And it's going to be more of a headache for you to try to operate within somebody else's system. Even if that system is a great system, it's going to be more of a headache and more challenging and ultimately disappointing to you than just going out and doing it yourself. Because quite frankly, if you're that entrepreneurial, you're going to have a blast doing it yourself, right? I mean, it's all about the journey.
Oh, yeah.
For a lot of entrepreneurs, it's not about having everything perfect. It's about making those incremental steps and the journey that you're on. So there are a lot of people who should just never be the franchisees. They need to be the people creating the businesses that then become the franchisors.
Yeah, and I've even heard of entrepreneurs that have gotten successful and they got up in it, becomes a company and it becomes a lot of structure, and then it becomes the day-to-day grind, and all of a sudden they're not creating anything new, and it's not the chase anymore. And all of a sudden they're like, I got to get out. Here's their baby that they created, but they can't just operate it on a day-to-day basis and do the daily grind. They have to go back and go try another startup because that's what they thrive off of.
No, that happens all the time. I mean, I work with people who turn their businesses and help them turn their businesses into franchises, and that's something very, very real and serious that we talk about. And that's often overlooked too. But, people always think about, oh, I can't wait to turn this into a franchise because then I can expand and grow and we can do it this way. And it's going to be so great. And I say, but you can. That's to be true for sure. But it fundamentally changes that entrepreneur's role within the company, because now you're overseeing a larger brand instead of your one business. And as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it does get more like a corporation, which is the opposite of what the entrepreneur wants. And so that, you see a lot of businesses that are built up to a certain point and then they get bought, or, some people have the forethought to think about that they want to start a business, they want to grow it through franchising because they want to get purchased down the road and then go do something else.
Okay, Josh, you're a encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to franchising and how it interrelates with entrepreneurship. It's been fascinating listening to you, and I'll give you a chance to have the last word and make sure you let people know how they can contact you if they're interested in your services.
Well, yeah, thank you, Joe. Thank you. It was great meeting you at Podcast Movement. Thanks for having me on the show, and thank you for your service and every vet out there for their service. And the one thing I want to leave you with, and then I can give, where you can find me, is that if you're coming back from serving our country and you're looking to get back into the civilian life, take the time to figure out what's going to be best for you, and don't rush in to a franchise, because if you get into the wrong franchise, you're going to lose a lot of money and you're going to be miserable. That's not to say that there's not a good franchise out there for you, but I think it's so important that when you're returning home and you're trying to get back in the game, to really think about what's going to be best for you personally at that point in your life and where you want to go forward with your life. And if people just took the time to do that, I think people would realize that some of them will be good for a franchise, and then it's a matter of, okay, let's figure out what's the right franchise for you. And others will just never even consider it because it's not something that's good for them. In terms of me, I've got best place to reach me is email. You can email me at josh@indy franchiselaw.com. I love hearing from people. So don't hesitate and tune in if you'd like to my podcast, which is called Franchise Euphoria, which comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. And we do some interviews. We do some shows, just myself providing some franchise tips of the day. And I recently brought on a co-host who we just have a blast together. And he actually has, and still is in corporate America, has been there for 20 years and has a background in operations and management and marketing. And so between the two of us, we add some really, I think, interesting perspectives to the franchise space.
Well, Josh Brown, it's been great talking with you. And thanks again for being here today and sharing your knowledge.
Well, thanks, Joe. Keep up the great work.
All right. Take care. Thank you for listening to Veteran on the Move, your pathfinder to freedom. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. Reviews are always greatly appreciated. So until next time, this veteran is Oscar Mike.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.